Hello, everyone. Welcome. For those of you who are trickling in with us, feel free to use that chat and let us know where you're calling in from. We're very excited to have people all across the US and beyond chiming in for these tours. It's been lots of fun to see where everybody's coming from. I know I myself am in South Carolina right now, and Tim is joining us from Massachusetts. We're also going to be hearing from speakers today from Pennsylvania and Texas. So we've got some pretty good representation amongst our speakers. So feel free to pop in that chat where you're from. We'd love to hear from you. We'll be getting started here just in a few moments. We got some Los Angeles, California representation going on here. Excellent. Hello. I can see more people are trickling in. Welcome, welcome. We'll be getting started here in just a minute or two. We're just going to let a few of our last minute attendees trickle in. If you're just now joining us, we'd love to hear where you're joining from. I know that we've got representation across the US, and we're interested to see where you are tonight. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Just a few housekeeping tips really quickly. First of all, throughout our presentations tonight, we're going to be having a Q&A after each presentation. So feel free to drop any questions you might have in that Q&A function, or you can put them in the chat and I'll be sure and try and grab them from there as well. I'm enjoying seeing lots of people coming in from some different places around California. If you feel comfortable with it, pop into that chat where you're joining us from. We'd love to hear. Furthermore, all of these presentations are being recorded, and you can find the recordings of not only tonight's tours, but other nights' tours as well on our Go Public Gardens Days website that you utilize to register for tonight's tours. So feel free to go back and check out some of the previous tours that have happened or the ones that are coming up. And on that note, be sure and check back with the website and register for either tomorrow or Saturday's presentations if you haven't already, if you're interested in joining us for those tours. Closed captioning is available for tonight's tour, so if you need closed captioning, feel free to pop that little CC button down at the bottom. And on that note, I would like to go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Lauren Garcia Chance, the Outreach Manager for the American Public Gardens Association. And we are so glad that you're joining us in celebrating Go Public Gardens Days. Go Public Gardens Days is the annual spring observance of the annual Public Gardens Association's Go Public Gardens campaign, which aims to drive attention and attendance to botanical gardens and arboreta across North America and the world. Many of the association's over 600 members are located all across each of the 50 states, the District of Columbia, Canada, and around the world, and they all join in this celebration with public events and special offers throughout the week. Hundreds of these gardens have submitted details about their participation at gopublicgardensdays.org, where you can locate gardens in your area and filter by the different types of events that are being offered by those gardens in your area. So be sure and check that out. And without the help of Alexandra Cantwell at Norfolk Botanical Garden, these virtual tours would not have been possible. So I'd like to take a moment to thank her for all the work that she has done in making this happen. And I can tell that Tim is eager and can't wait to tell us about Polly Hill Arboretum, and I'm excited to hear about it myself. So without further ado, let's take a trip to West Tisbury, Massachusetts, where we're going to learn about the Polly Hill Arboretum from Tim Boland, their executive director. Tim?
Thanks, Lauren, and thanks, Alexandra, and everybody who put this together. And thank you for the opportunity for Go Public Garden Days. It's really a cool thing you've all put together. I'm pleased to be part of it. Plants are powerful. That's kind of my title, but it's a subtitle of the small garden making a big impact. So I want to tell you a little bit about our garden. It's an interesting place on an island, and more specifically talk about how our plant conservation mission has evolved over several years. First of all, where are we? Well, we are in West Tisbury, Massachusetts, on the island of Martha's Vineyard. Down here in the corner, the bottom corner, you can see Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and we're right off the coast, 5 miles from Woods Hole, the famous Oceanographic Institute. That's where the ferry boat leaves from. It had very early settlement, earlier than Plymouth. In 1602, I'll talk about how that happened. It's actually related to plants, which is kind of cool. The original inhabitants were the Wampanoag tribe, and they're still here today and vibrant in our community. One thing that's happened during COVID, we typically have 17,000 year-round people, and then because we're a tourist destination, 100,000 people show up, mainly in July and August. So it's really hectic then, but because of COVID-19, the pandemic, we have had an influx of people moving here and moving here permanently. So it's been really fascinating to see. It actually causes some problems with our affordable housing, which is a real issue here on Martha's Vineyard. How big are we? We're 100 square miles. The highest point is 311 feet, not very high. Average precipitation is 42 inches, which is pretty good, but what we experience almost every year, and this is why this place is a tourist destination for its beaches, we have seasonal drought in July and August, so that's a challenge for our plant collections. We're zone 7A, we're more moderate because we're a maritime climate being an island, and we can grow a lot of plants. So who came here first? Well, there's some debate, but we do know that this dapper young man, Bartholomew Gosnold, with these ridiculous lamb chop sideburns, he showed up in 1602. He was hired by the London Merchant Company to come to Martha's Vineyard. Actually, not to come to Martha's Vineyard. His original destination was Jamestown, Virginia, but he was blown off course, ended up coming into Cape Cod Bay, saw all the cod in the water, and actually named Cape Cod, and then the Elizabeth Islands around Martha's Vineyard. So what he came here for was the sassafras tree, which is kind of neat. It's one of our unique native trees in the North American flora, and it was purported to have medicinal uses. And so he came here, and they stayed for just over a month, I believe, and harvested the twigs, the leaves, and the bark and brought it back to England. One thing about living on Martha's Vineyard, we're part of a geological past history, which is a morainal or outwash plain, which is repeated in Long Island, Block Island, the Elizabeth Islands, Cape Cod, Nantucket, and Martha's Vineyard. And it's essentially gravel over sand and then thin layers of organic matter. And I'll point that out in a moment. We have a very similar flora to all these places because of the geology. And here we are on the island. Polly Hill with my cursor is right here, this block. We're 72 acres, and we have a lobe of the moraine, which is kind of a perched landmass above the regular outwash plains. And you can see the pH of our soils are drastically acid. So we are the land of blueberries and rhododendrons and very, very, very free draining soil. Well, Polly Hill is kind of a hero to many people. I'm going to tell you her story because she's really the reason we were founded. She was a person who had a strong belief in growing plants from seed and is very curious. She got going at the age of 50 years old, which is kind of inspirational, and insisted on growing plants from seed. So she was a real experimenter early on. And here she's pictured with one of her azaleas. Her story, though, goes back actually to the Delaware Valley, an area that's rich in gardens, as we know. Excuse me, in 1926, her parents, Howard and Margaret Butcher, bought Barnard's Inn, which was an old sheep farm on Martha's Vineyard. And at the time, they made a 40-acre purchase, and then they added 20 acres later. Polly was greatly influenced by her time in Japan. She attended Vassar College and then spent a year teaching in Japan, where she became enamored with Japanese azaleas, ikebana, and bonsai. And so that influenced her love of the Japanese flora. She would marry Julian Hill in 1932. He was from St. Louis, Missouri, and he was a DuPont chemist. So they lived in Wilmington, Delaware during the year and then came to summer on Martha's Vineyard. In 1954, she would meet Dr. Rokujo. She would go over to Japan with one of her sons to visit, and she was told to meet Dr. Rokujo. And this relationship would end up flourishing. Dr. Rokujo, over time, would send her a lot of seeds, and he would do most of the hybridizing. And so Polly's probably most well-known group are called the North Tisbury azaleas that were a result of this relationship with Dr. Rokujo. Polly's mother passed away in 1957, and then Julian and Polly Hill inherited the farm. And it was at that time, she was 50 years old, that she started to grow things from seed. She was heavily influenced by the Delaware Valley. She took courses at the Barnes Foundation, Longwood Gardens, and so she was a self-trained horticulturist and botanist. And over a 40 to 50 year timeline, she planted thousands of trees here on Martha's Vineyard, and many of them she would name, and many of them would end up in the nursery trade. And she would, in fact, win several medals, like the Scott Medal from the Scott Horticulture or Scott Arboretum and the Garden Club of America Award. But there was a point in time where she was ending her career and they thought that she was going to sell the property. Her kids didn't want to really carry it on. And she met this man who's pictured down here in the right corner, David Hamilton Smith. And David Smith was a medical entrepreneur. And what he had discovered after years and years of research was the cure for childhood meningitis. So David and his group patented the cure, and that's where he became wealthy. And he met Polly Hill, and finding out about her plant records, Polly Hill is notable for being one of the first private gardeners to computerize her plant records, going back to 1974, if you can imagine that. And when David found that out, he said, well, you know, you're a scientist just like me. You observe, you record, and you share. So he decided to buy the property from the family and established the Arboretum officially, actually in 1998. Well, here we are today, and now we're a total of 72 acres. Since I've been here, we acquired 12 additional acres. And so this whole outline here, this is our visitor center parking lot. In a woodland, we have about 40 acres of oak woodland. And in 2001, we acquired this large property to the south of the main campus. And this is where our production and our maintenance building is currently located. And these fields are very special to Polly Hill. She insisted that we keep them open. And so they're part of a study, which I'll talk about tonight, of diversifying those fields and seeing what we can grow in terms of native plants. Well, in my early times here, I was actually the curator, the first curator in 2000, and boy, I seem old now, 2002. And in 2004, I'd become the director, and we were about to engage in strategic planning. And my background is in horticulture, classically trained in ornamental horticulture. And then I got a master's degree in plant taxonomy. And I became aware of plant extinctions, plant diversity. And I was trying to convince the board that, yeah, what Polly had done was super important. But when you look at the world now, and we can see it today with so many things challenging plants and ecosystems, I wanted us to adopt a stronger presence in conservation, particularly horticultural conservation. And so we embarked on that by inviting Peter Raven here, and I know he doesn't really need an introduction. He's the former director at the Missouri Botanic Garden, but he was welcomed by our board. And in fact, there were 300 people at his talk. It was so large that we had to move it to another venue. And he gave a talk that was about, frankly, the title was How Many Plants Will Survive the 21st Century? And those of you who've heard Dr. Raven, he just rattles off these statistics, and many of them, kind of tough to listen to, but emboldened our board to adopt plant conservation. Finally, we started on that path in 2004. Well, one thing you have to do is you can talk about conservation, but you have to build the capacity to do these things. So we didn't have a greenhouse. In fact, I didn't mention Polly grew most of her seed right in the ground, which is, somewhat primitive. She didn't have a greenhouse, so we wanted to build one. We wanted to take her house and create a botanical horticultural library and an apartment. And then we didn't have a maintenance building. This barn that's pictured here is 1750. It needed to be restored. We always need endowment money, the toughest money to raise. We did that. And then we also wanted to build an education center and botany lab. This building, the far barn that you see in the distance, isn't heated, so it's quite chilly, particularly at this time of the year in the fall, and certainly we can't use it in the winter. And we also wanted to begin, which we have, a collection expansion garden. So we went through a long period of fundraising. We were successful. The first thing we did was to build a poly house. This is kind of a joke here, the name, but it opened on Polly's birthday, or her 100th birthday in 2007. And it was a goal of mine to get this built before Polly would go to the great garden in the sky. And she passed away 3 months later in April of that year. So we were really happy that she could see this greenhouse come to fruition. And, it's been a huge success for us. My background before becoming a curator and director was a plant propagator for 10 years. So I really enjoy the challenge and joys of growing plants from seed. What do we grow though in terms of plants? What's our focus? You have to have one. Our collections policy pretty much encumbers the Atlantic coastal plain from Maine to the panhandle of Florida, the flora of Martha's Vineyard, excuse me, Japan and Korea. That's the going back to the influence that Polly had here. So we've been on many, many trips. Why do we wild collect? I'm not going to read this to you. That would be god awful, but we do it to carry on Polly's work of experimentation and now plant conservation, our own kind of take on it. And we try to, with certain groups, which I'll talk about today, the native Stewardias of North America, and also native azaleas. We look at specific plant groups and try to find the gaps and where we can find new plants in different parts of North America and or Korea and Japan. And then when we go into the wild, we capture data about these plants and we share it with people. Also, part of it is to determine the best practices for plant propagation and the cultural requirements of plants. We, like many people in the public garden field and many gardens and arboreta, we display plants to tell their stories and and teach people about them, our visitors, students, and other collaborators. We do introduce plants to horticulture, just like Polly. And then, like many botanic gardens, and really the most important thing in a lot of all of our work, encourage the appreciation of plants and biodiversity, make people fall in love with plants, make them understand the ecology and the places where these plants come from. And by doing so, you hope that they become stewards of these places and gain a greater appreciation for the green world that supports us. So our objectives are to grow plants here. outside of in situ, we do it ex situ, and we have priority groups of plants. I mentioned how we determine where we go is to find genetic gaps that we are underrepresented. We are very involved with island floristics, and this was something that I had to kind of convince our board. What is a garden if it's not really what's the value of a garden if they're not really invested in their local flora? It's our home. We should have a great understanding of the plants around us. And so we embarked on a new project, which I'll tell you about. It's now 15 years later. And also, I think a lot of us realize that, there is plant blindness going on. There's not a lot of coursework available in American universities anymore about field botany or just basic woody plant ID. So that's kind of a troubling thing. And that's one of our roles here. So we have 5 different groups of land steward groups that maintain almost 45% of the open space here on Martha's Vineyard, and we help train them to learn and inventory plants on their property. And then we train students, particularly students in curatorial techniques, and we've been very successful. And then we grow plants, which I'll talk about for these island conservation groups for restoration and then home gardeners. Well, here is the kind of a backlog of trips that we've been on: Japan, quite a bit, Alabama, South Carolina, and Georgia. There's reasons we go to these places, which I'll talk about. So we really have, after building the greenhouse, set kind of a heavy pace to go to many, many areas exploring, which it's been a blast. Why Stewardias? Well, Dr. Steven Sponberg, who's pictured here, he passed away this past March. He wrote the original monograph on Stewardia, the deciduous leaf Stewardias, which are temperate. And Polly loved Stewardias and grew several of them and named many cultivars. So it's a natural thing for us to be involved with. And the 2 North American cultivars are not widely distributed in botanic gardens and arboreta, and across their range, they're endangered. So we're very involved with Stewardia. Here are some of them. I mean, they're remarkable plants. I know a lot of you have seen Stewardia. They're in the tea family or the camellia family. These 5-petal white flowers, they're just incredibly beautiful. And oftentimes they have beautiful bark. So it's a great plant group to work on. The 2 species we're involved with are Stewardia malacodendron, excuse me, which is called silky Stewardia, and it has this really interesting distribution, which you can see dabbed all over. This fall, we're going down into the Panhandle. This will be our first trip and over into Alabama to get this genetic diversity. We have been in many of these other areas, so we're keen to find more. This is what it looks like in flower. I mean, it's a stunning, stunning plant. There's some plants that show this remarkable kind of striping on their petals, which is really pretty cool. Here's one that was collected in 2007. There's nothing like seeing a tree flower for the first time that you collected the seed of. And this is from Alabama. The other groups are, excuse me, the other Stewardia is the mountain Stewardia, Stewardia ovata. Very interesting distribution here over into Virginia, but also mainly in the Cumberland Plateau. So this is another beautiful species. Look at the flower there. I mean, it's quite remarkable. I should mention that Stewardia for us, I'm knocking on wood here, are for the most part not favored by deer. We have 50 deer per square mile, so that's a real challenge to our collections. Polly Hill, because she didn't have a greenhouse, would just sow the Stewardia seeds directly in the ground. And I've done that before, and you can have germination anywhere from 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years to 5 years, but it's always somewhat sporadic. So it has a woody seed that is tough to break down and knock out the inhibitors. I will say, though, we've had more success recently, and this is in our greenhouse right now, by giving them a cold, constant refrigeration at 40 degrees. We have these new refrigerators in our new botany lab that have a more precise kind of steady cold temperatures instead of kind of up and down. And we've had remarkable germination using this new refrigerator. We also do clonal propagation of new plants or polys cultivars. And here's a refrigerator that we use that we do a double treatment. First, we reroot them traditionally by cuttings, vegetative cuttings, take them and put them in when they go dormant into the refrigerators for about 2 months, maybe just a little bit over 10 weeks, pull them out and give them a dark period, a little warmer at about 50 degrees. And here they are last week, all the cuttings we've had. Generally, if I had to lump them all together, the success rate of about 65%, which is really great. The problem with Stewardias typically, though, is you see them leaf out and then they collapse. So these are all holding strong. So we think this methodology really works. Here's some rooted cuttings of a Stewardia clone right here. And when we can, we publish, this is the International Plant Propagators Society, Taming the Wild Stewardia. We'll put this on our website soon so you can get at it, but down at the base of your screen is a link to our Stewardia page, which goes into great detail about the taxonomy of Stewardias, the propagation of Stewardias, and the diversity of the Stewardias. The other group we're interested in are native azaleas. Polly named several azaleas, different cultivar names, and they do really well in our soils. They're drought tolerant, they like free draining acidic soils. So we've had great success. So we've been collecting these for really the last 15 years. Tom Clark, our former curator, received a grant from the American Rhododendron Society to collect some endangered rhododendrons, including two that are relatively new to science, like 15 to 20 years were named. Rhododendron Colemanii, Eastmanii, and then one that's more common, Vasii, the pink shell azalea. They're very, very beautiful plants. When we go on these collections, of course, when I said we take notes and document and share this with authorities or the people who grant us permission, this is Rhododendron Eastmanii, and this is actually what it looks like in bloom. This was collected in South Carolina. Colemanii has either white or pink flowers. This is the type specimen location by Ron Miller, who's an amazing plantsman. So this is another plant that both Eastmanii and Colemanii we have in our collections. One I really love, though, is Vasii, which is pictured here. When we go on these expeditions, we take herbarium specimens. I'll talk about the value of that later. I will tell you, though, we have concerns with the changing climate on Martha's Vineyard. We go to a lot of different places, but we're certainly, travel to Georgia and all these places, but we're really concerned about our home. We have storms that are really quite powerful, and in more recent years, they're kind of, really impacting the coastal areas of Martha's Vineyard. This is an example of that. This is on Chappaquiddick, which is kind of an island off of Martha's Vineyard that's actually attached just at a thin strip. So it's not really a separate island. It's part of Martha's Vineyard. But huge storm that came through. This is typical. These are oaks just blown down in the water. So one of the projects that we've been involved with is kind of dealing with this. And a really interesting project was the moving of the Aquina Lighthouse, which is also called the Gay Head Lighthouse. And it literally was starting to get close to the very edge to plummet into the ocean. And so, believe it or not, at great expense, and I'm not even sure what it was, it might have been 3 to 5 million, it's in that range. They built this railway kind of system and picked it up and moved it back, I don't know, maybe not even a football field's length. But in doing so, they damaged populations of the horse gentian, which is pictured here. It's a plant that's in the honeysuckle family and has these really beautiful orange fruits that generally have about 3 seeds, and they're really hard to grow from seeds. We have had germination this year for the first time of just 2 seedlings. So we've been actually cloning this plant. It's adjacent to the lighthouse, a population that's probably within about a football field's length. And we've had great success. So what we're doing is restoring the plants that were damaged in the original move of the lighthouse. We root them from cuttings, we plant them out in these boxes, and then we dig them up. And last year, the first plants went back into that area for restoration. The other thing, Polly's was a really wise person. And there's a quote in a book called Vineyard Stories. And she says, walk around the fields, walk in the woods, walk around the beaches, study what you see, which is pretty much a great way to focus your education program, to have people observe, have people record, and they learn that way. So preserving biodiversity, study what you see. What we decided to do was to engage in just that, to study the flora of Martha's Vineyard, which is called the flora of Dukes County officially. And some of those outer Elizabeth Islands are in Dukes County. So we've been over there. So a dream of mine, and it came true. Again, it only took money, was to build an education center and botany lab. And it's been just a turning point for us in terms of the capabilities that we now have. I should mention we're 100% solar. We have an excess of power produced on our campus. We're very proud of that. So here's the building, constructed and opened in 2017. It hasn't been that old. It has a 40-seat classroom. It has Polly's archives on the second floor, a label room for our plant recorder to work in, and then it has a 8-cabinet herbarium, and there's more cabinets in the basement. It has a full luxurious basement, and it has a botany lab over here. We've been really fortunate with our volunteers, and particularly these two people, uh, Dr. Greg Palermo and Margaret Curtin. They're pretty much people who attended our classes. We brought a lot of different taxonomists on the island to train people in different groups, some of them really hard: the sedges, the grasses, the goldenrods, the asters, aquatic plants. And so Greg and Margaret over time have rediscovered plants we haven't seen in 40 years, discovered new plants completely to Martha's Vineyard, and one new to the United States. So they are beyond your average botanist. They love doing this. And so this is what we have thus far: 1,363 different kinds of plants. 875 are native and 488 are non-native. That's a figure just from yesterday. So it takes a group of people that are dedicated to helping us with this project, which means herbarium vouchers. And so we have these really phenomenal people that work on gluing the plants, and they're very artistic and they're super good at doing what they do. We now have about 4,000 specimens. This also includes plants we collect seed of on our expeditions, both in the United States and in Japan. Just checking the time here. I think we're doing okay. Before I get to this, I'm just going to have a drink of water. So I think you're aware of this, and I mentioned it earlier. Plant sciences are in danger in a way. More than half the plant science courses, like botany and plant diversity, have been cut from universities. This is from a publication from the Native Plant Trust, a group that we work with. And you start to wonder, well, where will our future curators and public garden professionals come from? It's really troubling. Um, so we started in 2008 a curatorial internship, and out of it, we've been able to train individuals in taxonomy, field botany, and really get them kind of in the groove of loving plants and going crazy about them. That's our goal. And so one of our first, he's actually from the island, which is really kind of cool, is Matthew Lobdow, who now is the curator or the head of collections at the Morton Arboretum. And he's a research associate. And he's worked with me on other projects like magnolias and oaks. And he'll be joining us this fall. Another one is Emily Ellingson. We're all like proud of these people. Now, obviously, we had some role, but these are innately talented and driven people. We realize that, but we do feel like if we can be a part of their kind of experience, it's for the better. And they certainly have helped us out. They're essentially doing curatorial work once they arrive here. And she's at the Arboretum State Botanic Garden of Kentucky. Here's a few that go back in time. Cat Mahalik, he's at University Ambler campus. Temple University. Tori Stewart's at the San Francisco Botanic Garden. And Katie Wilson down here, she actually spent some time in Palestine after our internship, and she's getting a master's degree. And typically that's what happens. People go on from here to get a master's degree in plant taxonomy. Thomas Murphy is at the University of Florida getting his PhD. What we try to do with these folks too is take them on an actual collection trip, a seed expedition trip. So our past plant curatorial intern and a person we hired as our plant recorder, Liz Thomas, has been working on our large fields, which we want to keep open, and taking measurement of our meadows. You know, to be honest, for many, many years, we'd mow them, we burn them, but we really didn't kind of experiment with them in terms of taking data. And so she's been great. She's been driven by this project of inventorying. It's kind of cool. Here's one of our beautiful stone walls that's over 200 years old. But if you look in the foreground there, a little bit past, I should say, the walls, is a plant I love, but it's a pioneer plant that we're trying to knock back. And it's a sumac, Rhus copalina, the shining sumac. So while it is a beautiful plant, if we let these fields go, they would turn into forest. And so we want to make them more like grassland meadows. And to do that, we need to understand what management techniques work to prevent this from taking over. Also, another one is bayberry. There's a few woody plants that are really challenging. So this is a drone shot, and these are quadrants. And someday Liz will talk about this with more knowledge than I have. I'm just an innocent bystander, but it's really kind of cool. These quadrants have there's some control templates, but there's also active management of mowing and some herbicide work as well. So we're finally, inventorying within these quadrants, gathering data, which is really the way to do science. Let's talk about Martha's Vineyard, though, another project that we started a long time ago, in 2006, 2007, I should say. Beyond the floristic work, we're working to grow plants to restore damaged habitats. So you can see we're lucky we have open space of 42%, fully developed, 31% available, probably less than that now with the housing craze here, and potentially available 16%. One of the things that you should realize, though, when you kind of take the island, I'm going to slice it in half like that. As you go this way, these are all minimum 1 acre lots for the most part. And you get into this area of the island, they're 3 to 5 acres, as well as down here. So this is actually, even though they're developed, they have homes there, they're large areas. But you know what happens, people come in and they scrape away the native landscape, which is kind of a tough thing to see, particularly taking down oak trees, which is very hard to see. So what we ended up doing is, we're trying to turn the effect of this habitat fragmentation around, because this is what's been happening in a broader sense. You can see this is just one of the glaring statistics of almost a third of our overall birds from the 1970s are in great decline. So if you remove all these native plants, trees, forbs, you take out the insects as well and the pollinators, so you drive down biodiversity. To combat that is to really, the only way to do that is to plant native plants. So 2009. This was in the public garden. It's the plant animal connections in acting locally. It's a story of our plant propagation efforts to grow lots of native plants from seed and offer them, called MV wild type. A lot of native plants were coming from off island. Sometimes they come all the way from Wisconsin, believe it or not. So we tried to turn that around, and we have. This year, we're offering a larger assortment of what we call plugs. And I know a lot of you know about plugs. They're smaller plants that typically are bought in and bumped up. We grow them from seed in these deep cells. And this year, we're offering kind of a box of plants. We can fit 12 in there. And we have a new logo. It's called MV Wild Type. And this is kind of I think, a really nice symbol. We know the monarch butterfly is in peril. So we have the orange milkweed here. And so that's a plant that we sell. Here's another one, just an example of a beautiful native plant that should be used, whether it's in a native garden or in a mixed garden, the blue vervain. Well, our greenhouse since 2006 and officially opening in 2007, here it is way back then, and it has expanded. If you look at these trees right here, this is what it looks like now. Those are cryptomeria trees. Yoshino is the name of them. We needed a windbreak. This field and the island can have 60 to 80 mile an hour winds, and so we had to put in a screen. And we pretty much have expanded our production. We got a Stanley Smith grant a few years ago. So this area that's full right in here are all plug trays. And we grow in a good year 40 species. We typically have about 25 to 40. And we also grow woody plants from the island, from seed and cutting. So this has been, as I mentioned before, really huge for us to be able to produce plants on site, sell them, or use them for restoration. Our next venture in terms of a type of plant or a group of plants are oaks. So oaks in general, the genus Quercus, 1/3 of the world's oaks are at risk. We're surrounded by oaks. Our island is probably more or less, I would say, 80% oaks. We have 6 species and 4 documented hybrids. But we're interested in growing oaks that are in trouble, red listed oaks. And so that's a project we're working on with the Morton Arboretum and a group of collaborators, which we're very, very, very excited about. I wanted to mention, just kind of closing up here, all of this work, which has taken a long time and a lot of energy, a lot of focus and support from our board of trustees, which I want to mention. Last year, our plant recorder, Liz Thomas, said, hey, why don't we do this plant conservation and biodiversity benchmarking? And at first I was like, well, it's probably a lot of work, and it was, but she took it on, and also with our administrative group here. And there are 5 core areas: leadership and governance, ex situ, conservation, in situ. And so we came out of it with excellence in biodiversity and conservation. We're super proud of it and very thankful that we went through this process. And if you're considering doing these benchmarkings, and you're worried about it, you should participate in it. Even if you're not at a level you want to be at, you can use this information, bring it to your board and your advocates and say, hey, we want to get there from here, help us. So that's what we've done. Well, I'm going to close here and say all this work, it takes a village. And so here are some people that have been involved. It's Ian Yokums, who's our grounds arborist and our grounds manager and arborist here in the orange. Oliver Osnes, he's our horticulturist. Liz Thomas is our plant recorder. Our past curators, Thomas Clark was really influential in many, many projects in conservation here. And Todd Rounsville, who is now at the USDA, he was responsible for many improvements in our database and the expansion of our nursery. And then our plant propagator right now is Nancy Rogers, who's actually started as a volunteer and continues to work with us today. We're so fortunate. I should mention Brian McGowan, our plant propagator. Before that, Bridget Reed, who was our plant propagator for a time, and also other people who have helped us along the way. Our docents are huge for us and volunteers in general. We can't do this work without people, dedicating their time and energy and their passion. So we have tour docents, visitor center attendants, grounds workers that were here today and planted like many, many plants out in the grounds. We have people helping in the greenhouse. We have people helping in the herbarium to glue things. And we have our collectors, our botanists like Greg and Margaret that give their time for our program. So we're grateful to all these folks. Well, I am also grateful to Alexandra for coming up with this idea and Lauren and the people at the APGA. And I kind of rushed through this because it was a lot to cover. You know what is the best part of the virtual thing is knowing that you can actually not have to be virtual someday and come to Polly Hill. And we would love that. We'd love to host you here. And for more information, if you want to contact me about any of this subject matter, just go to info@polyhillarboretum.org. And we would love to hear from you. So thanks again, everybody, for coming along on Go Public Gardens Day today.
Thank you so much, Tim. Oh my gosh, what an amazing history and so much conservation work that's been done. I know that, Polly Hill is certainly a shining star, well-deserved recognition across the board for lots of different things. We have had a couple of questions come in, if you don't mind, Tim.
Sure.
The first of those was kind of whenever you were talking about the strong winds that y'all have, and of course every garden's lack of funding in certain regards. And so their question was, would wind turbines be viable to install to generate income?
Yeah, well, actually, Joe Biden and his group just 3 days ago approved the largest wind farm in North America off our coast. So we are trying to be energy independent. We're doing it with solar, but our wind is so strong out in Nantucket Sound, actually, not so much the sound, but further south, is a pretty extensive wind farm that has been lagging for many years. But now the proposal has been approved. And Polly Hill, very early on, bought into this cooperative. So we're supportive of it. I'm supportive of it in terms of my wife and I bought into this Vineyard Energy Cooperative. So yes, we're going to be part of a kind of the leading edge of wind turbines, at least the larger farms that's going to be established here over the next 5 years. One thing that's really cool about it is the high school is going to have a tech group or a school where we train people to maintain the wind turbine. So it'll keep people here and employed.
Thank you very much, Tim.
Sure.
Another question that was asked was, what resources are included in public tours, or what are tours like?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, I apologize. The question was, which resources are included in public tours? Can you talk a little bit about what your public tours are like?
Our tours.
Yes.
What you mean on the grounds?
Yeah, I think, if the public were to come and visit Polly Hill, what could they expect to experience?
Oh, okay. That's a good question. Well, what you would experience first is really friendly people to greet you. Also, when you come to the visitor center, adjacent to it is a large plant sale area. So you'll come in, and just this year, and this has been a long time coming, all these things take a while. We've really gotten into interpretation. Quite honestly, we haven't done a good job of that. So you'll come into the visitor center and you'll read about our history, our conservation work, our collections overseas, our education and internships. But we also have what's called Arboretum Explorer, which you can use on your phone and walk around. It takes about an hour totally. There's a lot of benches in and around the Arboretum that you can rest in. but you can really go through and learn about not just Polly Hill, but the history of the site. We're on the National Register of Historic Places now in 2015. We're very proud of it. So you'll learn about the agrarian history of this property. You know, it goes back almost 300 years, which is quite remarkable. And you'll find really amazing, what I would say, well-labeled collections, because we're all about Polly's devotion to plant records and labeling our plants. And so you'll see just some really beautiful view sheds as well. As you can see, this is a picture in early September in the morning. You know, we just have this kind of beautiful local vernacular, and you will see the quintessential New England landscape.
Thank you, Tim.
Sure.
What is your favorite plant or must-see plant at Polly Hill?
Oh, these are hard questions. My favorite plant at Polly Hill. Well, you know, I think one of my favorites is the tulip tree. And the reason being, there's a giant tulip tree. It was the second tree Polly planted. She grew it from seed. And she got the seed from the Crum Woods, which is on the campus of the Scott Arboretum, a Swarthmore College. And I did my internship there, and I used to kind of wander around the Crum Woods. And when I think of Polly, you know, she's doing this in her middle age, walking around with a little purse or a bag and grabbing seed, and then taking the patience to watch that grow. And now the tree outside is about 60 feet tall. It's beautiful. And, you know, the flowers are unique and the fall color. So that's probably the tree that I most admire.
Well, thank you so much, Tim. If anyone else has any questions for Tim, feel free to pop those in the Q&A or the chat. And I have no doubt, oh, we just actually had one come in, so I'll hold off before I let you go. Are there wildlife especially characteristic of the Arboretum or during various seasons that are characteristic of the Arboretum?
Wildlife, yeah, you know, right now we have box turtles, kind of, you know, they're here occasionally. One thing we have, which is somewhat problematic, is years ago somebody domesticated turkeys, and not the wild type turkey, but we probably have 60 turkeys here. A few years ago, you can find them occasionally. We have hummingbirds, and when you find a hummingbird nest, it's quite magical. We have red-tailed hawks. You know what's interesting about the Arboretum? There's a famous birder from Nantucket that would come over and give birding tours, and it was always interesting. He would say, because of our diversity of plants and the types of fruits they produce, we had an abundance of birds. So birding is very popular here. We don't actually have any predators for deer, which is a problem. We have coyotes, but because this is largely an agrarian area where we live, they get rid of the coyotes right away. But you will definitely see deer here. Also, not so great to find are skunks that were imported here as well. So it's a double-edged sword. But there's certainly lots of wildlife. In terms of pollinators, we did a bee study a few years back, and I think there's, you know, over 100 bee species that are located on Martha's Vineyard. Lots of moths. In fact, in the center of the island, I forgot to mention this, there's a 5,000 acre, which is incredible to have, state forest, which has 4 different endangered moth species. So it's a pretty cool place to be if you love wildlife and also the outdoors. It's really amazing.
Sounds incredible. I definitely want to come visit. So thank you so much, Tim. I greatly appreciate your time and you taking us on a whirlwind tour of not only the grounds of Polly Hill, but also the history. So thank you for that. And we are now going to go ahead and get in a car and drive just a few miles to Ardmore, Pennsylvania to go explore Haverford College Arboretum. So thank you, Tim. And let's go ahead and bring on Jennie.
Thank you, everybody.
Hi, Jennie. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello. Do you want me to go ahead and share my screen, or would you like me to wait
Go
till 7?
for it.
Go for it? Okay.
Nope. If you want to go ahead and pull up your PowerPoint, and we'll try and kind of drag this out just a smidge, get a little closer to 7, so that if anybody's hoping to join right at 7 Eastern time, they might be able to still get in here on time.
Sounds good.
All right, perfect. Let's take just a few minute break. We'll be right back here at 6:59 Eastern time. So it's just about 5 minutes. And if you want to hang out with Jennie and I, feel free. But we'll push this just a smidge closer to 7 in case anyone's hoping to jump in at 7 p.m. If you're hanging out with Jennie and I while we're waiting, if you want to pop your favorite plant into the chat, maybe we can get some discussion going around some favorite plants or unusual plants that you have an affinity for. Be interesting to see what everyone is enjoying right now.
We love hellebores in Pennsylvania.
I've currently been obsessed with anything with nodding flowers, to be honest. So I don't know why. I just love how there's kind of a surprise whenever you get underneath there and kind of poke under and see what they look like. So.
They're one of our first things to really start to flower once we get a little bit out of the colder months. So they're a nice welcome sign of winter's end.
Definitely. Melissa said that daffodils are her fave, although many of hers are starting to wilt. So I'm guessing that I believe you commented earlier, but I can't remember, but you must be in one of the northeastern or northern states. You're still getting to enjoy a few daffodils here and there. Mine have been gone about a month now down in South Carolina. So.
Ours at Haverford are just about wrapping up now.
Okay. So maybe Melissa is hanging out with you in Pennsylvania area.
Pittsburgh. Okay, that makes sense.
Pittsburgh. I will say, while I'm not a fan of social media, I think that one of my favorite things about having joined Instagram is getting to see like the flush of colors and pictures coming out from friends across the US as the temperatures warm up. So I get to enjoy daffodils like super early with friends in Texas and then super late with friends in the Northeast.
No, I agree. I love looking at all the different arboretums on the Haverford Arboretum Instagram page, but I often forget that they're located so far and wide. So I'll see wild things blooming. I'm like, wait, ours aren't. I'm like, oh, never mind. You're located in Tennessee. That makes sense.
We'll give it one more minute and then we'll jump straight into Haverford College Arboretum. All right, I have 6:59 p.m. Eastern time, so we'll go ahead and jump in. I am very pleased to introduce Jennie Ciborowski, who is the Arboretum Program Coordinator at Haverford College Arboretum, and she's going to be talking about the history and the grounds of Haverford. Go ahead, Jennie.
Great. Thank you so much, Lauren. Hi, welcome everyone. I'm very glad that you were able to come out. As Lauren said, I'm the Program Coordinator for Haverford College Arboretum. If you haven't heard of us before, we're fairly small. We're located in Pennsylvania in the southeast corner, right outside of Philadelphia. We're a suburb along the main line, so it's like a half hour outside of the city. But I'm really excited to present to you all today from far and wide and welcome you to come visit us at some point in the future. Hey, before we get things going, this is going to be a tour of the history of Haverford College Arboretum, and we can't talk about history without talking about where our land first began. So I'm going to really quickly do a land acknowledgement for the Lenape. So we at Haverford College Arboretum recognize and acknowledge that we stand and work on Lenape land. We pay respect and honor to the caretakers of this land from time immemorial, from now and into the future. This is something that we've recently been working on, is improving our relationship with the Lenape and recognizing how much they took care of our land in the past. So we'll talk about them a little bit more later and stuff that we've recently been working on with them. But if you are not from this area, the Lenape were the prominent indigenous culture that were pushed out of the area around the 1730s. And then our Arboretum story is going to take place in 1833. So that's where we're going to start. Okay, so this is an aerial view of the Arboretum. Arboretum itself is 216 acres. We are primarily interwoven within the college grounds, but there is a nature trail that surrounds the perimeter of campus that provides a much needed break for all of the students and also for the community. They can come in and use the nature trail on the grounds. We are free as far as admission goes because we are a college ground. Currently, we're closed to the public, but we have plans on reopening, fingers crossed, sometime soon. So we welcome you to join us when that happens. Oftentimes, students will ask, where's the Arboretum? And we always have to respond with, you're standing in the Arboretum. You live in it every day. We don't have as many prominent gardens as some public gardens may because our gardens are interwoven within all of the campus buildings, but we're going to focus on a few of them today. Okay, so in 1833, this is where we first began. Originally, it was farmland, and it was purchased in 1833 by a group of Quakers and originally intended to be an all-boys college. It was purchased for around $17,000, and originally it was like 185 acres. And this building that you see here in the center is Founders Hall. It was the very first building, and it was constructed the same year that the school opened. However, around the building, you still found primarily a pastoral landscape. We take claim to fame that we are the oldest planned college landscape in the nation. We can't say we're the oldest arboretum because we didn't acquire that title until like the 1970s. We're a little late on that bandwagon. And we also aren't the oldest college either. Colleges date back to the 1600s in America. But in 1834, we hired William Carvill. And William Carvill was a famed English gardener. And he was hired to come over to America and plan our landscape. So a lot of thought went into how the grounds were going to be laid out. Okay, so as I said, William Carvill came over and he really wanted to replicate his English gardening style in our landscape. There were three main components that he wanted. And these are components that we still try to uphold to this day. The first is he wanted there to be alleys of trees, and I'll show you a map in a second that you can visualize that on. But he wanted trees to line all the roadways and have pathways going through, and we still do that predominantly today. He also wanted there to be circles of trees in the landscape, so he typically planted 7 trees. He'd plant 6 in a circle around and 1 directly in the center. We don't really know why he did this. We know it replicated what he did in England, but I'm not sure if there is a horticultural reasoning as to why he chose this. And then the last thing is that he wanted to plant a conifer at every corner. This is the only one that we don't really uphold today, and that's mainly because it's a safety hazard. They didn't have to worry about cars in 1834. But today, with there being a lot of pedestrian traffic on campus, we can't have big conifers blocking all of the viewpoints. So that one we don't necessarily still do. Okay, this is his original landscape plan. It's going to be kind of hard for you guys to tell, but if you can see my pointer, this is Founders Hall right here. You can see throughout the map, all of the roadways are lined with trees going throughout. You can also see that all of these circles over here on the right-hand side, these were the planting circles. So those 6 trees around with 1 in the center. Something else special that I want to point out on this map, we have a big copy of this, luckily in our director's office, but these are all the original plantings that he had listed out from 1834. And also over here on the left-hand side of Founders, you can see small rectangles. And these rectangles exhibit just how into horticulture the founding of the school was. So each one of these is a garden plot, and they were individual garden plots for each specific student. They were about 40 foot long by 6 foot wide. So that's a big garden plot for anyone. But for each student to be given their own personal gardening plot, I just think is really amazing. Okay. The next thing that I want to talk about, just since we looked at the map, are trees that we still have at the Arboretum that are on that map. So we have 3 trees on campus that were on the original map, which means that he either planted them or they existed as part of the pastoral landscape. One of those trees is this tree right here. It is our bur oak, and it's located next to our library. It's one of the students' favorite trees on campus. It's a pretty majestic specimen. And the next oak that we have a swamp white oak that was also on the original map. This swamp white oak, as you can see, has a gate around the entire bottom area of it. The students jokingly call it the incarcerated oak. We recently did a tree risk assessment about 5 years ago, and when they went through all of the trees on campus, they found out that about 8% of the trees either needed to be removed or have remediation in some way. Since this was one of our original founding trees, we really didn't want to cut it down and have to get rid of it, but it does have some problems with rot, so we have to make sure that students are not walking under it, and that's the reason that this one is gated off. The third original tree is also another oak that we have on Founders Lawn, which is this area that you see here. There's one more tree that I would like to talk about before moving on, and that is our Osage orange. This tree is not on the original map, but we also don't have any record of it being planted at any point. So we're not sure how old it is. We're pretty sure it is very old, and it is lovingly called on campus the climbing tree. It's the only tree on campus that students are allowed to climb on. We have local preschools that come to our campus and have been climbing on this tree for decades. I've met people that are in their 80s and 90s, and they tell me about climbing on the climbing tree when they were little. So it's just a really sentimental piece of campus that we have. Okay, so back into history. In 1836, the first greenhouse was installed on campus. This again is Founders Hall in the background here. This is a painting that was done in 1838, but the greenhouse is located over on the left-hand side of the screen. This greenhouse was fairly large, and the most impressive thing about it is that it was entirely student funded. So students raised $600 to get a greenhouse on the campus. Doesn't sound like a lot of money now, but if you do the math, that's about $17,000 back in 1836. So they did a lot of work. And along the greenhouse, it also had a grape arbor. Now, unfortunately, this greenhouse was destroyed in a fire in 1855. So we've never gotten to see it today, but there is still a remnant of it left on campus. Our motto is preserving the past, planting the future, because we're really history based and we do believe in preserving a lot of the original historical aspects of campus. So here on the right-hand side, this is called the Carvill Arch. It was the end piece to the greenhouse. It's a little hard to see since the painting is very blurry, but if you look, imagine it towards the back of the greenhouse right here where the hoop is, this stone wall would have butted up right there. So this is the original wall from 1855 that we still keep on campus today. Hey, no need to read this. It's just our earliest record that we have of the campus club. So in 1901, there was a club that was formed between students, staff, faculty, community members, and friends of the college. And this club was designed to preserve William Carvill's original landscape. Like I said, the students had a very strong connection to nature. They really cared about the grounds. And at around the same time that the campus club was formed, there was a large ice storm that damaged a bunch of trees on campus. They formed this club to make sure that that ice storm would, even though it created damage, have something in place to help the trees after damage like that occurred. So this club really focused on the trees and their health. This club continued to exist throughout the 1900s and is probably one of the main reasons why we are considered an arboretum to this day. Okay, and then in 1915, we had a treaty elm planted. I mentioned in the very beginning that we have a strong relationship with the Lenape, and it's also a relationship that we are working on improving every day. One of the reasons that Lenape culture is so prevalent on our campus is because we have what we call the treaty elm. Legend goes that when William Penn and Chief Tammany met, they met at Chemamixon, which is considered a sacred ground to the Lenape, and there was a large American elm that was hanging over that area. This elm is often depicted in Benjamin West's painting, but we kind of know now that that painting was more for propaganda than anything. The treaty goes that, or the legend goes that they would sign the treaty underneath of the elm, and this elm we know is a descendant of that original American elm. So in 1915, C. Cresson Wister, who was a graduate of Haverford College in the class of 65, it was his 50th anniversary, and he donated this American elm graft along with 6 others. There were 7 in total, and they were planted in a circle on Barclay Beach. Now, unfortunately, a lot of them suffered from Dutch elm's disease, and this is the only still remaining graft of the treaty elm. But it's still a very prominent tree in both our culture and the culture of the Lenape. Whether or not you believe that the signing of the treaty happened, we still respect what this tree stands for. And we're working on currently installing another reflective garden on campus that will also have Lenape interpretation. And then in 1928, we added a pinetum. A pinetum is very similar to an arboretum, except for it focuses mainly on conifers. So during that year, hundreds of conifer seedlings were planted along Haverford Road. They were originally planted in the rows that you see on the left, and then later they were transplanted to be in groupings by genus and species. In the pinetum, there are 5 out of the 7 families of conifers represented, and there's also 27 individual species of pine alone. This pinetum has been taken care of throughout the years, and in the late 1900s, it was renamed the Ryan pinetum. This was after Dick and Nancy Ryan, who were 2 volunteers, and they really pioneered going through the pinetum, taking care of the trees, and labeling everything that is in it. Our Pinetum today is still one of the highlights of campus. I would definitely recommend if you are visiting to stop by. We're currently undergoing another restoration of the Pinetum. Unfortunately, this area is subject to a lot of stormwater runoff from our athletic fields that are built behind it that were not there in 1928, but they're certainly there today. And we're going to do some remediation in order to make it so that the roots of these trees aren't getting quite as waterlogged as they are now. Okay, then in 1933, we had the nature trail installed. So on the original map, I mentioned that there is a trail that goes the entire way around the campus. It's a 2.2-mile loop. Most of it is either done in mulch or in gravel. There's a section of it that has porous paved rubber. But really, this is probably our highlight aspect of the community. The community uses this trail for dog walking and running. There is a trail head that you can see right here. We have a large statue of a squirrel carved. That's because our arboretum and college mascot is the black squirrel. There is a robin's nest for children to play in. And we're working on our interpretation along the trail. Right now, it's a pretty scenic woodsy route. You really feel like you're immersed in nature while on it. And this is just a photo of the trail throughout the 4 seasons. I mentioned that the campus club was in 1901, but it wasn't until 1974 that we became an arboretum. So in 1974, John A. Silver, who was the class of 1925, he pioneered with the group of the campus club that was left to really have us have the title of an arboretum. An arboretum just meant that we had to go around and label more of our trees, but this is something that the campus club was already doing on campus since 1901. So really, we had already been doing a lot of the principles of an arboretum, we just didn't have the official title yet. Hey, we also have a few Asian gardens on campus. In 1990, an economics professor named Howard Teef wanted to implement an Asian garden in honor and memory of his wife. So that is how we got the Gertrude C. Teef Garden. The photo in the center is during the construction of it. We worked with Hiroshi Makita, and he did the original design. It was meant to be a Zen garden. There's a pathway of stone that goes throughout the garden, and then there's a larger area of stone that can also be raked. Then, a little bit later on, in 2004, we got a second Asian garden. This was installed right next to the original one. The second one was the Elizabeth Pryor Reed M. Dennis Asian Garden. This Asian garden was designed by Harriet Henderson, and it was meant to incorporate elements and artifacts from their travels from all over Asia. There's 8 different artifacts that are throughout the garden. And both of these gardens, when they went in, were accompanied by traditional ceremonies. There was a tea ceremony and also an ikebana flower arranging ceremony. Okay, next up on our list is the duck pond. This is probably the students' favorite feature of campus. Right when you enter, we have a large pond. This pond originally was just a really wet area in a cattle field. So wet that it kept puddling up and puddling up more and more. And they continued to let it flood and puddle until they cultivated it a little bit more into a man-made pond, and it became an ice rink. Unfortunately, there's a lot of runoff from Haverford Road. The photo on the right is the upper duck pond that runs into the lower duck pond, which is the larger one that you can see on the left. And there's so much salt and other chemicals in the runoff that the pond does not freeze anymore. So we can't have students skate on it, which is pretty unfortunate. The little skate house that you saw in the image before, I'll go back one, right there. That was the original skate house. They used to sell hot chocolate for 5 cents there, and that is where everyone's rental skates would stay as students and the community would come out to skate on the pond. Today, it's really a feature for wildlife. We love the duck pond. It doesn't attract as many ducks as we would like, definitely attracts more geese, but there still is variegated wildlife there, and it also has a pollinator garden that surrounds the perimeter of it. You can see in the bottom middle photo some evidence of the pollinator garden. And here's another photo of it. It's a Penn State certified pollinator garden. And we have a large meadow area next to it that we've recently stopped mowing as often. So we're working on turning this into a more natural landscape. I'm going to highlight quickly on a few other things that we have on our campus. So these are all smaller gardens. Just as important though, we have rain gardens on campus. There are, I believe, 4 or 5 rain gardens at this point. We do, as I mentioned, have a lot of stormwater on campus. So it's important that we find some way to filter that water back down into the earth in an eco-friendly manner. So rain gardens are really our friend. We also have a few green roofs. There are 2 large green roofs on Kim and Trenton, which are 2 of our newer dorms, and a smaller green roof on Stokes Hall. They're all fairly thin green roofs. There's no substantial plant growth up there with the exception of grasses and sedums, but we like our green roofs a lot. And there's also the Hillis Courtyard Volunteer Garden. This is a smaller garden that is right in front of one of our learning classrooms. This garden, as it says in the name, is maintained completely by volunteers. It's been a challenge this past year with COVID, as we have not been able to have those volunteers in, and we are very excited when we'll be able to welcome them back to taking care of this courtyard. And then also on the bottom right is our Peace Garden. The Peace Garden was installed in 2008. It was actually a project that a student developed. There's a peace pole in the center. It's kind of hard to see in this photo, but it says peace in a bunch of different languages around the sides of the pole. It's just a nice reflection area right next to our library. Another thing that I want to be sure that we talk about is the Haver Farm. So we have a working farm on campus. This is definitely something that the community knows us for, and something that we're really proud to be able to offer to the community. The Haver Farm itself doesn't make much profit off of the produce, but it really addresses food insecurity on campus. It is a farm for the students. We can't use a lot of the produce in the dining center because the majority of the produce is being harvested during the summer when we don't have a lot of students on campus, but they do have a CSA. They also have farm stands. Students are allowed to pick their own produce from the gardens down in the HCA plot, and it's really a learning and exploratory farm. And it would not be possible to have this farm operate without the help of the students. Students have a PE class that they can complete at the farm. They also volunteer there on a weekly basis and plan a lot of programs out of the farm itself. The photo here is our main production plot. But there's many aspects of the farm. We also have bees down there. We have 3 hives. We've recently taken over the bee program to an in-house operation that we're really excited about, and that is allowing us to harvest our own honey. So this past year, we learned, well, I guess 2 years ago, we learned how to harvest our own honey. We can do this in our dining center facility, and we sell our honey on campus and also use it at our annual Arboretum dinners, and students use it occasionally as well, but this is definitely a great process to learn. So just a few more photos of the production plot at the Haver Farm, and some student volunteers working at it. And lastly, these are the HCA gardens. So the gardens down at HCA, this is the pick your own produce portion of it. So students can go in there, get whatever produce they would like. It's conveniently located down in our apartment complexes. This is where most of the seniors live on campus, and they all have kitchens in their complex so they can come out, pick their own produce, take it back, and cook it up for dinner. And the last addition to our Haver Farm, and this is our most recent addition to campus, is we were able to put in a high tunnel this past year. We are super excited for the high tunnel because this means that we can address food inequality on campus better year round. So before, like I said, most of our produce was being harvested in the summer. We haven't had a winter to overwinter with this yet. It just got installed this past year, but this next upcoming winter will be our first trial run at it, and we're very excited to try it out. Okay, that concludes the majority of my program. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Oh my gosh, what a rich and vibrant past to Haverford that really is still living through today. It's amazing. One of the first questions was actually surrounding some of that history,
Sure.
and just how long those individual student plots lasted. When did that tradition phase out?
Ooh, good question. So the only thing that we know about our college from back in the 1830s up until about 1900 is really through meeting minutes that we found that the president's office kept. Unfortunately, the plots themselves aren't mentioned very often in meeting minutes. It's just something that the students had. But we know that they're on that original 1984 map, or sorry, 1980, yeah, 84 map. And we know that they were still there when the greenhouses burnt down in 1855. We're assuming they fizzled out sometime before the campus club took over because they don't really mention them too much in their minutes, and they started in 1901. So I don't have an
Wow.
exact answer, but I would guess sometime along there. But we did start back up with the Haver Farm, so now students do have a way to garden on campus, but definitely not those crazily large plots that they started with.
That's amazing. What a great way for students to be able to engage in horticulture. The next question we had was regarding the treaty elm and whether
Yeah.
or not there are currently efforts to graft it or ensure that the line of those elm trees continues.
Yes. So we are a big believer in witness trees. That's something, or trees that have witnessed a historical event. And so we definitely make sure the treaty elm is the only tree that we propagate, honestly. We're not a big propagation facility. We have a greenhouse, but it's used mainly for storing students' plants when they go home for breaks or over the summer. But we do propagate and keep the treaty elm. The treaty elm itself, hundreds of seedlings are under the tree every year. It is, I guess, a very fertile treaty elm. And there are several grafting and signs of that are in Penn Treaty Park has one. They've been distributed to a few other institutions and organizations around. So we definitely do want to keep the lineage of that tree alive. And we have some other specimens that we've planted from the original tree around our campus.
That's amazing. One of the other questions that's come in is regarding your farm stands. And it was, the question was, to whom do the farm stands sell? Could you talk a little bit about your farm stands?
Sure. So this year they've only sold to students, but that's because we've been completely closed to the public. In a normal year, anyone is welcome to come on campus during the farm stands session to find out and get stuff. I would say students, staff, and faculty make up the majority of the purchasing, but community is more than welcome to purchase from it as well.
So as a follow-up to that, did you have a surplus of produce this year with limited public access to the gardens?
We actually didn't have a surplus of produce. We're pretty good at finding ways for it to get used on campus. This year we started up a on-campus food pantry called The Nest. And The Nest had we got a lot of fridges to line one wall, and the students really got to use the produce for more of an extended amount than they normally would. We also partner with Ardmore has a food pantry, and if we have any excess produce, it goes directly to that food pantry.
Excellent.
So, not to waste.
If anyone else has any questions, please feel free to drop those into the Q&A or chat. We're happy to try and answer those. Thank you so much, Jennie, for taking the time to join us this evening and giving us a peek into the history and all the really amazing programs that you have going on at Haverford. I know that I personally wish that I could have taken some gardening classes as my PE credit. I think that would have been amazing. But thank you again so much for taking the time.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for setting this up. And if
Yes.
anyone has any questions, please feel free to either ask them, or if you want to email either of the emails that are on the screen, that's also totally fine.
Right. Thank you, Jennie.
Thank you.
Well, we are going to now move out of the Northeast, and we are going to head to some warmer climates and make our way down to Fort Worth, Texas. And we are going to be joined today by Steve Huddleston. And Steve has an amazing facility that he's working out of because especially recently, and I hope I'm not stealing your thunder, Steve, but he has been able to witness kind of the combining of the Fort Worth Botanic Garden and the Botanical Research Institute of Texas into a combined operation now, which is very exciting. But Steve, I'll let you share a little bit about that if you want to. If you want to go ahead and bring up your PowerPoint.
Let's see here. I think this is
Perfect.
the right one.
That
Should
looks
be.
great.
I hope it is. Okay, so
Says
am I
it's
good?
for the Go Public Gardens Days, so I think we're good.
All right. So am I good to go now?
You are good to go. I'm going to turn myself off.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Steve Huddleston. Formerly, I was the senior horticulturist here at the Fort Worth Botanic Garden. I was so for 26 years, but then I decided to retire at the end of December. So I've come back though to help part-time with marketing and fundraising for BRIT, which is the Botanical Research Institute of Texas. BRIT is now the parent organization for the garden. BRIT, in fact, is managing the garden. And I'll talk about that in my presentation. But I want to welcome you from wherever you are listening. Uh, and I welcome you, I would say from the sunny Southwest, but it's been cloudy lately. We've had a lot of rain. So that's a good thing because the garden is very green now. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Well, let's take a look. I want to give you an overview of the combined organization, that is of the Fort Worth Botanic Garden, as well as of the Botanical Research Institute of Texas, or BRIT. Well, let me give you a brief history of the garden. And I don't like uh, frames with nothing but text, but after I get beyond these facts here, I will show you some good pictures of the garden that will support this history here. But anyway, the original 37.5 acres of the garden were purchased in 1912, July of 1912. The Titanic went down in April of 1912. And then that summer, the first portion of the garden was acquired. So we've been around for a while. Then in 1933, the Rose Garden was completed. It is now on the National Register of Historic Places. It's a beautiful rose garden. I'll show you pictures of that. But that was quite a project for us during the Depression to complete our beautiful rose garden, which is really one of our signature gardens now. In 1934, we decided to change our names from the Fort Worth, well, no, previously we were Rock Springs Park because in this area there were natural springs, hence the name Rock Springs Park. But in 1934, we changed our name to the Fort Worth Botanic Garden. So we are the oldest public botanic garden in Texas. So we are an historic garden in many ways. Well, a lot of history took place over the years. And then in 1973, we opened another signature garden, and that is our Japanese garden. Exquisite. I'll show you pictures of that soon. In 1984, our begonia collection was founded. It is the largest one in the United States and one of the largest in the world. In 1986, the Deborah Beggs Moncrief Garden Center opened. That is the garden center out of which we operate today. It is our visitor center. I will show you pictures of that and the adjoining conservatory. In 2018, the Botanic Garden and BRIT launched a program called GROW. This was a partnership for education and volunteer efforts. You know, we've since 2011, we've been across the parking lot from each other. So we just decided to start collaborating with each other, first of all with education and then with volunteer efforts. And then we made it official in 2018 by launching the GROW partnership. And then in 2019, the Botanic Garden and BRIT expanded the GROW partnership to include membership. So we're really starting to collaborate with each other more at this point. And then in July of 2019, we started charging an admission fee to the Botanic Garden. And this was an historic step for us. For years, we had been a free public garden, and people liked that. We were a nice asset to the community. But gardens are just not sustainable as long as they're free and open to the public like that. So it was really necessary for us to start charging admission as most other botanic gardens in the country do. And my goodness, even though we've been charging admission, our attendance has been sustained. In fact, it's climbed. We're doing very well now. So it's a good thing because through those admission fees, we are bringing in more revenue that will support and sustain the garden. And that is so important. You cannot maintain a garden without additional revenue. And it was just necessary for us to start charging admission to bring in additional revenue to maintain this, this precious gem that belongs to the city of Fort Worth. So anyway, as I said, in 1912, the first 37.5 acres were purchased. This is what it looked like. The first phase was completed in 1931. That first phase was called Rock Springs Park, and it was at the very southern end of the garden, which is now on the National Register of Historic Places. And anyway, there were some, well, there were some natural springs. There were, well, 3 springs, in fact, in the area. And along with those springs, let's see, well, capitalizing on those springs, we installed or built waterfalls, pools, and so forth in that area to really dress it up and make it more inviting to the public. We brought in a lot of sandstone from a nearby county, Palo Pinto County, in fact, to install walkways and this observation deck here and pathways throughout that garden. And all of that was fine and good, but over time it fell into disrepair. And I'll get to that later, I guess, in our presentation. But anyway, well, I'll just say now, that south end of the garden has been renovated thanks to a generous donation from the Tinsley Foundation. And we now call that part of the garden the Tinsley Garden, named after the founding or the family that funded that renovation. But my goodness, it's beautiful now. We renovated the walkways, the stonework. We put in a huge fountain that supplies water through the area and feeds the pools in that area. And that whole area of the garden is devoted entirely to plants of north central Texas, native plants only. So it's a very wonderful part of our garden today, all of which started back in, well, 1912, but was completed the first time in 1931. So anyway, here's an overview of the rose garden. As I said, it was installed 1931 through 33. Through the works, well, anyway, it was federally funded at that time during the Depression. In fact, well, let's see, I have the name of it here. It was the Civil Works Administration, yes, provided funding for the completion of the Rose Garden in 1931 through 33. And it was the first unemployment relief project in Fort Worth. So it really helped boost the economy. It provided jobs. Men worked long hours for just about $2 an hour, installing the stonework, the beds, planting those beds, constructing this shelter house which overlooks the rose garden. It was quite a project for the day, but it has been a tremendous resource since then. Here's a picture of the rose garden taken from the shelter house. This is a beautiful view that overlooks what we call the ramp, looking down onto the lower rose garden. This garden was designed by Hare and Hare of Kansas City, Missouri. Well, I'm from Tulsa, Oklahoma. And when I came to Fort Worth, I looked at this garden and I thought, you know, this looks very familiar. Well, Hare and Hare also designed what is now the garden behind Philbrook Art Museum. At the time, it was the private residence of Wade Phillips, but it's the same design. They're in Tulsa at Philbrook Art Museum, as we have here in Fort Worth. There's a ramp, there's a lower garden, there's a pool, and then beyond, there is a focal point. In our case, the focal point is across University Drive, right below where the sun is shining. There is a shelter house there, which serves as the focus or as the terminus of this axis. But anyway, this is the view looking down the ramp. It is a formal rose garden. We have planted it with lots of shrubbery and hedges to enhance the formality of this garden. You know, we decided years ago, well, because of a virus called the rosette virus, not to put all our eggs in one basket. So we've really scaled back on the number of roses that we have in our rose garden, and we've interplanted them with either annuals and or perennials, so that we're not, as I said, putting all our eggs in one basket and providing more of a freeway, if you will, for the mite to transmit the disease. The disease is called rosette virus. It's spread by a mite, and it's been an issue for us, but I think we're managing it quite well because we've spread our roses further apart, and as I said, we have interplanted them with annuals and perennials to to help prevent the spread of the disease from one rose bush to the next. But anyway, here you have a beautiful view of the rose garden. We have Claudia Wanamaker magnolias on either side of the ramp that frame the view looking down the ramp toward the east. And then we have the large Italian terracotta pots filled with agaves as accents along the walkway. And then we have a water feature. The cascade is in place down the center. So it's a beautiful design, absolutely beautiful. It was dedicated the first time October 15th of 1933, again, during the Depression. And then it was redesigned and renovated really 50 years later, 16 through 17. And then it was dedicated again on October 15th, 2017. So, you know, things have to be renovated and updated, and there was a need to update this rose garden. We replaced arbors. We used pallopi wood, which will last a long time without succumbing to insect or disease or decay. And we redid a lot of the stonework. So it's just a beautiful garden now that will look good for many years to come because of the work that we did to renovate it. And here's one of the plaques in the Rose Garden. I'll just read it. Municipal Rose Garden developed under the direction of the Fort Worth Park Department, sponsored by the Tarrant County Rose Society, with the assistance of Tarrant County Federal Relief Committee, and mentions the Commissioner's Court of Tarrant County. But acknowledgement is also made to the artisans and laborers who wrought the beauties of the garden and gave of their best to a degree far exceeding their monetary reward. October 15th, 1933. So again, quite an accomplishment achieved with much pride during the Depression. Here's a view of our oval rose garden. The rose garden actually consists of 4 gardens. We have what we call the ramp, the lower rose garden, the Republic of Texas rose garden, which features old garden roses that were in cultivation during the years of the Texas Republic. And then this is the oval rose garden, which is in the shape of an oval and has pillar roses around the sides of it, roses in the concentric circles, and then of course you see a lot of annuals and perennials in combination with those roses. So it's a beautiful garden, and it's one of the main reasons that many people like to come to the Botanic Garden. The best time of the year to visit the Rose Garden is late April, May, and then again late October, November. We have a second period of bloom in the fall when the roses are just as beautiful as they are in the spring. So 2 good times to visit the Rose Garden. Well, the Japanese Garden, that's another signature garden of ours that opened March 29th, 1973. We're coming up on the 50th anniversary in 2023, so we'll look forward to that. But this magnificent garden consists of 7.5 acres, 5 pools filled with koi. We feature spring and fall festivals in the Japanese garden. These festivals attract large crowds from the community. It's a wonderful cross-cultural experience. Gives people a taste of the Japanese culture. We feature all sorts of performances by Japanese performers in dance, swordsmanship, ikebana, the tea ceremony, music, the koto, as I said, dancers, Japanese dancers. It's a very nice festival that we hold twice a year, usually in April and either October or November. So spring and fall for those festivals. But anyway, let me show you some pictures of the Japanese garden. Yes, here it is in the spring, just beautiful. You know, the Japanese garden does not feature a lot of flowering color as we see in Western gardens, you know, lots of annuals and perennials. That's not the idea of a Japanese garden. Really, the idea of a Japanese garden is to create a sense of tranquility, serenity, peace through different hues and textures of green. Green is a very calming, soothing color, and many people enjoy coming to the Botanic Garden just to get that sense of tranquility in the midst of an urban environment. But in the spring, you will see some flowering trees. We have azaleas that bloom, but that's about it for spring color. Nothing from, you know, bedding plants or perennials or annuals, none of that sort of color. And then again in the fall, We have a lot of color from the foliage on the trees. But here we're looking at the Moon Bridge. As I said, we have 3 large pools filled with koi. Here are some shots of the Japanese garden in the fall. It is spectacular. You may not think of Fort Worth as a place where there is much fall color, but you need to come to our botanic garden, and to the Japanese garden in particular, the week after Thanksgiving. That's when the Japanese maples reach their peak fall color. That first week after Thanksgiving, the first week into December, is just beautiful. Again, you see color from the bald cypress. So we have ginkgo trees in there, Japanese maples. It is very colorful. So it's a beautiful place to visit in the fall. And of all things, we even have snow in Fort Worth. Not often. We had it back in, this was in 2004, I think. And then, my goodness, this past February, we had a cold snap here in Fort Worth. You may have read about that. Many people were without power for a week or so. But we had a very good snowfall this past February. But the garden is absolutely beautiful in the winter and under snow. The snow lands on the roofs of all our structures, on the pagodas, the branches of trees. It's just an exquisite place to visit in the winter when we have snow. Well, we are known for our begonia collection. This was established back in 1984. This collection consists of 370 species, as well as 665 hybrids. They are housed in 2 greenhouses. As you see, one house here that features a lot of our species begonias. This collection was accredited by the Plant Collections Network in November of 2015, and it's the only accredited begonia collection in the nation. So we're very proud of our begonia collection, and many people come here wanting to see it. So it's quite a collection that we treasure, we maintain, and we work to preserve. Well, let's see. We have a garden center and conservatory. The garden center was installed back in 1986. The conservatory was opened at that time as well. It is a 10,000 square foot conservatory. It's a tropical conservatory. It was built to showcase tropical plants, obviously, and particularly plants that bear fruit. So you'll see kumquats in there, palms, bananas, mangoes, coffee tree, those kinds of things. And anymore, we want to feature this as a place where people can see tropical plants of economic importance, and as a way of teaching people about the importance of preserving the rainforests around the world, these places where these plants come from. But you can get a tropical experience right here on our own conservatory. Really, the best time to visit is during the winter. I mean, it's pretty hot in there during the summer. I wouldn't want to go in there in the summer, but you can visit there if you want in the summer. A lot of tourists do, but really the best time is during the fall, winter, and spring. And generally, every other year, we hold a butterfly exhibit in our conservatory. In the past, we featured as many as thousands of butterflies, tropical butterflies from all around the world. We typically do that in March every other year. So we're looking forward to doing that in March of 22, yes, the next time. So, but that's a wonderful experience for the community. People enjoy coming in there, and my goodness, we'll have typically around 35 to 40,000 visitors go through the conservatory just to see these beautiful butterflies from around the world. So it's a wonderful place to visit. Lots of flowering plants, fruiting plants. Well, we have a number of special exhibits. As you might guess, botanic gardens depend on admissions. They want people to come and see their exhibits. And so exhibits help drive admission. And of course, admissions bring in revenue to support and sustain the garden. So one of our exhibits this year is called Topiaries in the Garden. It is up through June of 21. This is a collection of 12 topiaries that we actually rented from the Franklin Park Conservatory in Ohio, and we planted them. The topiaries were delivered here last September. We planted them for the winter. They got blasted by that freeze in February, so we had to replant some of them, but they're planted now again for summer. in evergreen materials such as Asian jasmine, mondo grass, as well as annual and perennial blooming color. So they're really nice. They're scattered throughout the garden, and it's a delight to find them as people take a tour through the garden. Well, another exhibit is this stick work by Patrick Doherty. He's a nationally acclaimed stick artist. He has created stick sculptures across the country, a good 300 or so, and came here in February right before that cold blast and actually worked through a week of those cold temperatures to complete this beautiful sculpture called Stick Work. And it was completed in 3 weeks out of locally harvested saplings. I was a part of a team that went out and tagged the material last fall while the leaves were still on the trees. We tagged roughleaf dogwood and American elm. He said those were the two most supple native materials that he would work with here. And then he and his son came in February to craft this sculpture. It's just enchanting. It's beautiful. It's in a wooded garden, the Fuller Garden, and it really captures the imagination of people of all ages. You can wander through it, wind through it, peek out the holes in it, and it's captivating. So I would encourage you, if you can, at some point to come and visit this exhibit. It will be up for as long as it stands. It will certainly be up through the end of 21 and most likely into a part of 2022. Patrick Doherty likes to leave these up until they deteriorate. So it should last, as I said, a good while. So hopefully, if you're able to travel anytime soon, come and see us and visit this exhibit in the Fuller Garden. Well, our most recent exhibit is one that went up just last week. This is Sean Kenny's Nature Connects, made with Lego bricks. And this is up through August 1. So again, if you're able to travel this summer, come and see us and look at any one of these 15 sculptures that are scattered throughout the garden. These are sculptures of insects, plants, gardeners, all garden-related items. It's interesting, the Legos themselves are connected, and I think the lesson of these sculptures is to teach us the connection between us and nature. Just as these individual sculptures are connected together by all these Legos, you know, we want to have a good connection with the natural world. We want to preserve habitats, preserve ecosystems, and maintain the beauty of our natural environment. So hopefully you'll be able to come and see this exhibit as well, or just enjoy it online. As I show you, well, at least this picture. Here's the praying mantis. We've got a giant hummingbird. We've got gardeners in positions. We have butterflies, bees, all sorts of insects and flowers and people that depict our connection with nature. So that's a good exhibit. I think will attract a lot of people, especially families and children. Here you see the giant hummingbird, and you see this gardener on the left. I mean, I walked past him, her, and I thought, oh, who is that? Well, it's a Lego sculpture. So they make you stop and think about, again, our connection with the environment and nature. So it's a good exhibit. Well, let's see. We do charge admission to the garden, as I mentioned. In fact, it's $12 for adults, $10 for seniors, $6 for children, 6 through 15. We started admission July 19th of 19. Again, the reason was to sustain the garden. The whole issue was sustainability of the garden, which is so important for a garden of our magnitude. You have to maintain it. You have to add to it and improve it. And the only way you can do that is through revenue. And admissions give us the necessary revenue to maintain and improve our garden. We do have and offer levels of membership. You're welcome to become a member of the garden. If you become a member of our garden, you can actually take advantage of a reciprocal membership that we have with at least 300 other gardens across the country. So if you're a member of our garden, you can visit any of those 300 gardens as well and get in free. So you can see here different levels of membership. Well, just let me give you a brief history of BRIT. Let's see how we're doing on time here. Anyway, BRIT is, again, the parent organization that manages the garden. It started back in 1987 as a nonprofit to house SMU, that's Southern Methodist University in Dallas, its herbarium consisting of 450,000 specimens, and its botanical library with 75,000 volumes from the personal collections of Lloyd Shinners. Britt occupied at that point a warehouse in downtown Fort Worth. It was a wonderful warehouse, old warehouse, turn of the century, wooden floors that creaked. It was very nice to visit. Anyway, 97 through 2002, Britt acquired the Vanderbilt University's herbarium, the Houston Public Museum's herbarium, and the Dartmouth College Herbarium. In 2011, Britt moved into its current building, from which I'm broadcasting. This is a $46 million LEED Platinum certified building with a green living roof featuring plants of the Fort Worth Prairie. In 2017, Britt rescued 470,000 plant specimens from the University of Louisiana Monroe, bringing the total number of specimens housed at Britt to 1.47 million and elevating Britt's herbarium to the 9th largest in the U.S. In 2018, Britt opened the George C. and Sue W. Sumner Molecular and Structural Laboratory, which houses a state-of-the-art scanning electron microscope. So as you might guess, a lot of research takes place at Britt. The building, as I said, was completed in 2011, 46 million LEED Platinum certified, and the first building in the region to have a green roof planted with flowering plants of the Fort Worth Prairie. So there you see an aerial view of Britt, and in front of it, well, actually behind it, facing north of the building, is a prairie. Britt wants to maintain a prairie there, so there you have a prairie in the midst of our campus. I might add that together now we comprise 120 acres. The garden was on its own 110 acres, but you add 10 acres from Britt, and so we're a combined campus now of 120 acres in Fort Worth's cultural district. We are very well situated in Fort Worth. We're right on University Drive. Down the street from us is the #1 zoo in the nation, the Fort Worth Zoo, Texas Christian University, and just north of us, by a block or two, we have the museum district, the Ammon Carter Museum, the Kimball Art Museum, the Modern Art Museum of Fort Worth, the Cowgirl Museum. So we are in the museum district, or as we say here in Fort Worth, the cultural district. We're very well situated, just about 2 miles west of downtown. So it's a good location. And let's see, here you see some of Britt's research efforts. They have a wonderful, as I said, herbarium, 1.47 million specimens that they keep in a whole wing, a refrigerated, climate-controlled wing of the building. Lots of information that they keep on all those specimens. And here you can see some of the research they're doing on the left, I think, in Colombia, the above right, Madagascar, and the bottom right, a prairie right here in Fort Worth, where a lot of research is conducted on endangered plants, plant ecosystems, plant conservation. So the Britt team is involved all around the world to preserve and conserve and study plants. And here's some information. Well, there on the top right, you see the green roof on the Britt building. The bottom right, you see an example of our seed bank. And on the left, you see a team that's involved in our seed bank, collecting seeds to preserve, well, seeds of native plants, native endangered plants, so that we have those on hand and in a preserved state here in the Britt building as well. So lots of work, lots of good work going on at Britt. The mission statement is, the mission statement for our combined organization now is to explore, explain, and display the plant world to enrich lives and conserve life on Earth. That's what we're about. You can subscribe to our newsletter. We have an e-newsletter that you can subscribe to, a monthly e-newsletter, an e-calendar that shows you all the events happening here. You can subscribe to these by going to our website, www.brit.org. That's brit.org. If you log on to that website, you can navigate your way to, my goodness, you can sign up as a member. You can subscribe to our newsletter, the e-calendar, and just keep up with all that's going on in the garden and at Brit. And you can follow us, of course, on social media. And I think that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Steve. What an amazing place to explore. I know I've had the privilege of exploring the Fort Worth Botanic Garden and Brit's facilities as well. And it's just unparalleled. So I hope that all of our attendees tonight get the chance to do so in person too, but your virtual tour was a great glimpse into it. We do have some questions for you, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So the first question is, could you give a little bit more information about the climate of the Botanic Garden and what the climate is like throughout the different seasons?
Well, we have hot summers. We have hot, for the most part, dry summers. We are zone 8. You know, we used to be 7B, now we're 8, zone 8. So, you know, my goodness, summers are hot here. June, July, August. We're just looking forward to the end of September, and then October when it cools off. Fall is wonderful. November is ideal. But you know, I mean, we have 90-degree, 100-degree temperatures during the summer. Here's going to be another hot summer. So it's hot here. Winters are wonderful, though. They're mild. You know, we have 2 growing seasons here. So we can plant summer annuals. Actually, we can plant about 3 times a year. So what we can do, we can plant our summer annuals in April, and they will stay in the ground through the end of October. And then in October, we plant our winter annuals. So pansies, alyssum, snapdragons, kale, all the winter annuals, and they will run through April or so. But then there's a window, say between March and May, between say March, April, and May. During those 3 months, when we can plant things like delphiniums and geraniums and alyssum and osteospermums, things like that. There's just about a 3-month window in there. So we actually can get about 3 crops a year if we plant it correctly.
Amazing. The next question that was submitted was, what are the top 3 research focuses of the Institute?
Oh my goodness. You know, I can't speak very well to I'm not as familiar with the research end of things. Oh my goodness, you caught me off guard. Well, I know they're all about ecosystems, you know, endangered plants. I know that. They've done work in the Philippines, Colombia, and so forth to study endangered plants. We've got one researcher here working on blueberries, native blueberries. We've got people working on, oh my goodness, fungi, all sorts of things. I mean, we have some outstanding research scientists here, and they're in all sorts of fields, and I can't really speak to all those fields, but there's a lot of research here. Brit has the Brit Press. They've published a number of books. For example, The Flora of North Central Texas, The Flora of East Texas, 2 huge volumes published by Brit Press. So a lot of publication, a lot of research, a lot of writing goes on.
Yeah, and I know that the Brit Press has actually even published many books for states as well. So if you're chiming in from a different state, they may actually have a state about plants in your state. So another question that came in was regarding the current Lego exhibit that you have. And it was, do they actually build the exhibit on site with the Legos, or do they bring them in already pre-created?
You know, that was my question before they arrived. Fortunately, they came in already assembled, which was nice. I mean, it would have been fun to see them built on site, but they came in fully assembled. They came and they were placed on metal platforms that we placed in different places throughout the garden. So yes, fully assembled.
Great. And you said that's going to run through August this year?
Yes, through August 1st.
Okay, awesome. And the last question we've got here is if you could discuss what kind of wildlife you might see if you're wandering through Worth Botanic Garden.
Oh my goodness, you can see lots of wild people. No, I tell you. Oh, we do have a lot of wildlife. In fact, in 1953, we were established as a bird sanctuary, so you'll see a lot of birds here. We have a blue crane that visits the pools in the Japanese garden. He likes to feed on the baby koi. We have ducks, wood ducks, waterfowl. We've had feral hogs here in the garden. We've had wild turkeys, foxes, Of course, we have a few snakes. We've had either beaver and or nutria, raccoons, of course, skunks occasionally, lots of insects. So yeah, there's lots of wildlife here.
Well, thank you so much, Steve. It's been an absolute pleasure getting to see the Fort Worth Botanic Garden through your eyes. And a thank you to all of our attendees. Of course, these garden tours would not be possible without your attendance. So thank you so much. We hope that you will join us tomorrow evening, again at 6 p.m. Eastern time. And tomorrow evening, we'll be taking a dash from Washington, D.C. to Woodside, California, and then back up to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, as we explore Tudor Place, Filoli, and Japanese Cultural Center. So we hope that if you haven't already, you'll go ahead and head to the Go Public Gardens Days website and make your reservation for tomorrow. So hope to see you all then. Thank you.
Good night.